And we're up on YouTube right now.
Thank you, ma'am. We're just waiting for the mayor.
Yes, sir.
Bethany, besides Councilmember Pell, are there any other members of council who are not on the committee?
That's the only person I see.
Okay. Would you let me know if any other council member joins in?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Is the chief on? I see Councilor Jackson.
Chief is here. He's logging on so you can see his face in just a second.
Did you just send it to me, Jason?
No.
But we're still waiting.
I texted Rick.
Ma'am?
I,
We did.
I
Thank you.
sent a text to Rick.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, the mayor is signing on now.
Okay, I see the mayor, is Chief Reynolds with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm having a little bit of difficulty with my audio or my video, but I'm here.
Okay, well, it's also a little difficult hearing you on your audio, Chief.
Okay.
You're either too far away from the microphone or,
Can you hear me now?
that's a little bit better, but you sound like you're in a cave.
All right, Jason's working on that for us. We're all going to be actually speaking, so that's helpful feedback. Thank you. We're all kind of speaking from the same room.
Well, that was totally muffled. I didn't hear what you said. Are you going to another room? Chief?
Yeah, Jason's trying to work on it right now. We're trying to have one audio for the whole room. So that's, can you hear that any better?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So are you going to be on with video as well, or?
Yeah, I'm working on that right now, yes. That's the goal.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and everyone. How y'all today?
I'm fine, Mr. Mayor. How are you today?
Doing terrific. Thank you.
It's like Groundhog Day. We're back again.
Get up and do it again.
Here we are. I will give a few more seconds for the chief so his audio and visual is functioning properly. So folks, just bear with us a few more moments and we'll get started.
Terrific.
Peter, can you hear us now? I'm just testing the audio.
So Chief, your audio is a little muffled.
About the same.
Okay, Chief, we see you. Mr. Mayor. I think the mayor is still with us.
He is. He just doesn't have his video on, council member.
Ma'am?
He's on. He just doesn't have his video on right now.
Okay. Mayor, you ready to proceed?
Here it is.
Okay, good. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And we'll call to order the Public Safety Committee for October the 8th, 2020. As a matter of personal privilege, I'm going to start us off with a moment of silence. And I would ask everybody to, in their moment of silence, to pray for our country. Let's pray for our president and his immediate family who are suffering from the effects of COVID-19. He's also has several members of his senior staff. There's some senior military officials who are either affected or in quarantine. Also, our country is in the early stages of absentee in-person voting and absentee voting by mail. We started that in South Carolina as well. So let's keep our country and our democracy in our mind and pray for the president to have a full and complete recovery from the COVID-19 virus. Thank you very much.
Amen.
I want to welcome all those who are listening in. I want to recognize also that we have two members of council who are not members of this committee, Councilmember Jackson and Councilmember Appel. We welcome you all to join in and listen into this committee report. The agenda, the first item of order is the approval of minutes from August the 11th and September the 8th. I hope that y'all had an opportunity to review those minutes, and I'll entertain a motion at this time.
Move for approval.
Second for approval. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The single item on our agenda today is with the presentation and discussion of the Charleston Police Department after action report from the events of May 30th, 31st, and May 31st. We will receive from members of the Charleston Police Department and from our legal counsel the nuts and bolts of this report being prepared. It is a preliminary report. The committee will have an opportunity to ask questions, offer comments and input from the report. The public will not have an opportunity to offer comments at this time. I received the report at 9:30 this morning. I believe all members of this committee received a hard copy of this report sometime this morning as well, even though some members of the committee, all of us had an opportunity to review the report at our legal counsel's office in advance. I understand that the report has now been made public and all members of council had an opportunity to receive the report. I did not have anything to do with the preparation of the report. Neither did the mayor, nor did any members of this committee or council. I did receive a proposed outline of the report, and I offer some suggestions to make sure that the report and the outline was as comprehensive as we can make it be, to ensure that we receive a full and updated report as to the events of May 31st and May 31st. At some point, if y'all were on the call a little bit earlier, a few moments ago, we were trying to schedule a follow-up committee meeting. We're having some difficulty getting everybody scheduled online, and I want to make sure we have a full committee so that we can all participate in that. That second follow-up committee will then have the opportunity to receive input from the public, and I'll discuss those mechanics with the committee before we adjourn for today. So with those comments in mind, are there any questions from my committee members as to what I just outlined? Any other input that you want to put in at this time? I would appreciate it. Okay, all right. Well, I'm gonna call on Susan Herdina, our legal counsel. She's gonna start us off, and I think then at some point she's going to pass the baton off to Heather Malloy. So Susan, you're on base.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, Councilmember Shade, Mayor, and other committee members. Obviously, there's a lot to cover this afternoon, but I wanted to start by taking a few moments to mention Heather's role in this report. And as you all know from our prior meetings, Heather Malloy is one of the legal department's attorneys. And she was tasked to assist the police department in their effort to evaluate their actions on May 30th and 31st, and to determine how to help improve their performance in the future. You're going to hear more from Heather on her role in this report and how the report was created this afternoon. But I wanted to take a second to tell you that Heather took the lead in organizing the fact-finding process that is the foundation of this report. And it is fair to say, and she probably won't be as open about her involvement as I'm going to talk about it, in the sense that she doesn't, her ego won't allow it. But it is fair to say that she spent many days and weeks reviewing and organizing the data that you see in this report. This included numerous conversations with both officers and command staff. She listened to many tapes of transmissions and participated in meetings with the officers and the command staff, and overall scrutinized the facts. She then organized all this data to present the timeline and the significant turning points that you're going to see in this report. And she did that, I believe, and I think you'll agree with me, in a clear and coherent fashion. It was an arduous task, but a necessary one. Again, as I think it serves as the foundation and the springboard for the analysis of the actions as well as the next steps. So that being said, this afternoon, you're going to hear from Heather, you're going to hear from the chief, you're going to hear from several officers who will be providing the overview and the highlights of the report. But I did want to share that information with you from the legal department's perspective. Heather, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, or I'm sorry, good afternoon to Mayor Tecklenburg, the council members that are present, the committee members, and committee chair Peter Shahid, of course. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you, Susan, for the introduction. I am going to present a summary of the after action report today. I have been tasked with leading and organizing the fact-finding process in this after action review. And this is an after action review of the events of May 30th and May 31st. A preliminary after action report has been developed by the Charleston Police Department and is available publicly on Charleston Police Department's website. I have reviewed that report and will provide you with a summary of the report today. I've also asked some command staff from the Charleston Police Department to be present and to provide you with more information on certain sections of the report. Today, I have with me Chief Luther Reynolds, Captain Tony Cretella, Captain Jason Bruder, and Captain Dustin Thompson, all who were an integral part of the operations of the events of May 30th and 31st, and also with the development of the report itself. I know that you all have copies, everyone that's present, so it would probably be helpful if you took out your copies of the report, and as we go through it, just thumb through. I think that would be the best way to do it. I additionally want to mention to you that the Charleston Police Department, in conducting this after action review, did reference guidance and authored by the National Police Foundation. And
Heather, are you still with us?
He froze.
You froze. Uh-oh.
response to major events.
Heather,
and
you may need to back up a little bit.
while
'cause we
increasing
heard.
transparency within the community. The guides that have been reviewed by the Charleston Police Department emphasize areas of review such as command and control, internal communications, external communications, and areas such as planning, procedure, training, and the development of promising or what can be called positive practices, and of course, lessons learned. According to these resources that were reviewed that I have mentioned, part of an after action review process includes fact finding. In essence, we're talking about gathering of information following an event to determine what is successful and what areas need improvement. This was done in this instance, and following the protests and riots of May 30th and May 31st, I began working with the police department to begin gathering that information. Hundreds of hours have been spent in this process to obtain the most accurate information possible. Officers have spent days poring over radio dispatch tapes, creating timelines, reviewing reports, videos, obtaining and reviewing calls for service information, reviewing arrest information, property damage information, and response to resistance reports. The National Police Foundation and other law enforcement agency reports also refer to the formation of committees to review such information and to analyze categories of importance. Additionally, those resources recommend for each category that positive practices and lessons learned be developed. Additionally, they recommend that a list of actionable items be made. And finally, the recommendation from these resources is that these items on the list be implemented. All of this has been done in this instance. The sum of the items listed at the end of the report will talk about things that have been implemented already and others are pending, and that will be covered at the end of the report. So for an after action review, the Charleston Police Department created a committee in 5 delineated areas and held these meetings, developed promising practices and lessons learned, and also the pending items that I discussed. So for the report itself, you can divide the report in essentially 3 sections. If you take a look at it and take a look at the table of contents, generally we have an introduction to the report. The middle of the report is what I would call the fact-finding portion that I discussed. And then the final part of the report is the after-action review. That is where you have those categories that are recommended for police departments when doing their after-action reviews. And in this instance, we have 5 categories that have been reviewed. Those are command and control, internal communication, external communications, keeping track of resources and personnel, response to civil disturbances. So within each of those categories, you are going to see the positive things that came out of the review of that category and also lessons learned. So initially in our introduction, we have on the first page acknowledgements that have been given to many people in assisting in this report, and also anyone who assisted in the events of May 30th and May 31st. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Reynolds at this time to address the acknowledgements.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. You're on, Chief. Now you're not, Chief. We can't hear you. Chief Reynolds, we can't hear you.
How about now?
There you
Yep.
go.
That's good.
Thank you. First, I want to thank our partnering agencies. There's a more comprehensive list in the document itself. I want to thank all of our officers and our command for all that they've done throughout this, the events of the 30th, the 31st, and everything since then, and including this after-action report, and all the members of our organization. I want to recognize and thank our residents, our business owners, and everybody of the city of Charleston. This has been a very painful and difficult time in our city, and many suffered and endured very significant losses and were traumatized by these events. This has been a very challenging learning process for our organization and for our city, and the progression for us, as will be outlined today, has been significant. One of the questions that I've been asked is, why do an after-action report? We do those for any events of significance. We do those often. We always have to have a healthy learning environment so we can learn from events like this. This was a significant event, and we must improve and learn from this event so that we continue to have better outcomes. I actually initiated this immediately within the police department. In addition to our initiating this, I also was directed to do an after action by the mayor, the council, our community, and others who I think deserve and expect and need an after action that's both discussed openly and transparently and is also codified. So that's what you'll hear today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Now, we are still in the introduction phase of the report. You will see that there is an executive summary on page 6. This is kind of the findings of the report in a nutshell. Remember, I talked about the 5 categories that were reviewed. If you review the executive summary, you will see summaries of each of those categories that I think will be helpful to you if you just need to refer to them. I'm going to now skip over to the fact-finding portion of the report. It's called the overview of events and description of the CPD response. Before I get into the timeline, it's important to note some of the events that were occurring during May 30th and May 31st. Of course, we knew there was tremendous civil unrest throughout the country because of the death of George Floyd. And on May 28th and May 29th, the Charleston Police Department started planning for potential events as a result of those protests. In particular, on those dates, the Charleston Police Department did not have any local, credible, verifiable threats. They knew that there was a Justice for George Floyd rally scheduled in Marion Square for May 30th from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. They knew also that the group that scheduled this event did like to march, but there was no other confirmed information. Additionally, another group wished to protest at Marion Square, also called a Justice for George Floyd group. The information known was that that group liked to bring flowers and actually asked people to come and bring flowers to the event. Nevertheless, despite the lack of confirmed information, the Charleston Police Department did create an incident action plan. They also activated a partial civil disturbance unit, even though the plan itself and the intelligence did not justify that activation. Also, the Charleston Police Department, in developing their plan, kept in mind that the Charleston area had not had a riot in over 100 years. The Charleston Police Department handled many special events and peaceful protests. And at that time, there was no expectation that that day would end any differently. On May 30th, the Public Safety Operations Center, which is also called the PSOC, was opened and command staff were assigned. There was a roll call and Incident Channel 3 was open for operations. Now, you will recall the last time I came before you, I presented a timeline, and that was my review of Incident Command Channel 3 from that date and into the early morning hours of May 31st. I'm going to go over briefly the timeline for this period, and I'm doing that because when I was here last, you did ask me to present some visual presentations of the routes of the protesters and the rioters, and also you were interested in seeing the fire calls and also seeing the calls for service. So this was a very extensive project that was put together to get you all this information based on the specific timelines that were created and also separate directional timelines. The people in GIS actually worked very hard to put together these maps that show the routes and include these other calls. So I'll generally go through the timeline. I don't want to spend a lot of time because I've already presented this at least for May 30th. But at the same time, Captain Cretella will be putting up maps as I explain the timeframes and indicating where the protesters or rioters went in those instances. So from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on May 30th, the Charleston Police Department had officers in the crowd to monitor. The crowd at that time, in that time period, quickly increased in size, at one point growing to about 2,000 protesters. The protesters, in fact, did wish to march around the streets. They started in Marion Square, but they did want to march. At that time, the Charleston Police Department and Mount Pleasant civil disturbance units were staged there for support. The Charleston Police Department, prior to this event, had been in contact with Mount Pleasant CDU and other CDU units and other agencies to be on standby just in case they were needed. But essentially, when this event started, the CDU for Charleston was put out because there was a thinking that they would be possibly needed in another jurisdiction to assist. The crowd during this time frame of 2 to 4 was mostly peaceful. There was one disturbance where a police vehicle was surrounded and CPD and Mount Pleasant came in and were able to handle that situation, and the march continued. At that point, some of the protesters went to White Point Gardens. You can see that depicted on the map. So you need to know that each of these maps will show the routes of the protesters. They will also show any calls for service that came in and were assigned to the police department. Those are indicated in blue dots. And the fire calls are, when we have them on the maps, will be indicated in red dots. You can see on the lower left corner that there are different routes of protesters with a different color green. From 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., we have the peaceful protests continuing. The Charleston Police Department is undergoing crowd and containment and traffic management. At this time, the number of protesters decrease. The Charleston Police Department is monitoring the weather. There's a large crowd, and they are hopeful that when the weather comes in, there will be a dispersal of the crowd and lessen the numbers. There is a disturbance at King and Calhoun. And again, the CDU units from Charleston Police Department and Mount Pleasant go in, and the crowd eventually calms. At this point, Charleston County CDU arrives and stages. The rain comes in as was hoped for, and the crowd disperses. At this point, the PSOC command holds the day shift over. Next, we go into the 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. timeframe. At this point, we have a much smaller crowd, and the crowd is heading over to the Ravenel Bridge. Charleston Police Department sends Charleston County, Mount Pleasant, and Charleston CDU, all of those units to the bridge. At this point, there are about 100 people, 50 are on the bridge, 50 are on the roadway. The protesters at one point engage in a sit down in front of the CDU units. CDU, you can hear them on the incident channel 3 requesting, hold on, I lost my place. Requesting assistance for arrests at that time. The protesters at that point decide to leave the bridge and march back to the peninsula. They march through the peninsula and end up at Mother Emanuel Church. There are about 75 at that point. Additional CPD command staff are called in to respond to headquarters. Now we get into the riot time frame. That's 8 p.m. on May 30th. We discussed this before. At this point, the riot is beginning. The rioters are in the market, flipping tables, smashing windows, fighting police, assaulting citizens, and throwing objects and rocks at officers. There's a group of 25 to 30 who are the main attackers. These rioters are not part of the group that was out on the bridge. The PSOC instructs the CDU that are still on the bridge to get to the market and make arrests and deploy less lethal munitions. Charleston County and CPD then arrive to contain the rioters. A group comes behind those units to attack them. The rioters end up moving towards Meeting Street, and CPD command calls in several agencies for assistance. Many calls went out at that time. And additionally, calls start for the assistance, for a request for the assistance of the National Guard. At this time, Charleston County Air Support arrives and gives dispersal commands. A police cruiser is set on fire, and multiple calls for service are coming in at this point. Less lethal is again authorized, and the Charleston Police Department is trying to make arrests. A reverse 911 call is set out, requesting residents to secure their residences and businesses and to shelter in place. We next get to the 9 to 10 p.m. The riots are continuing. The rioters are on King Street at Charleston Place. SWAT units are on King Street and with quick response vehicles patrolling King Street at that time. Now we have two CDU unit lines at King and Calhoun and Meeting and Calhoun, trying to form lines to push up King Street. At that point, those CDU units are flanked and attacked. There's a noted curfew set for 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. at that time. And the Charleston Police Department sends out a tweet to avoid the downtown area. Again, more support from law enforcement agencies are coming into the peninsula. From 10 to 11, the riot continues. More resources have now arrived. The SWAT, SLED, and other patrol units are on King Street patrolling. More calls for service are coming in. And of course, fire calls are coming in as denoted by the red balls. From 11 to 12, the riot continues. Additional assets have arrived and there's an organization to push northward. There is a coordinated push up St. Philip, King, and Meeting to move the rioters out of the peninsula. And I don't know if I said this, but there was another crowd coming up behind the CDU units, about 100 people in that crowd, a new group that had come into the peninsula. So from 12 to 1 a.m., again, we're having the agency coordination moving forward to move past each side street and clear the streets. Again, calls for service and fire calls are continue at this time as well. From 1 to 3 a.m., this is the time frame when all the units have pushed the rioters out of the peninsula. The units reach Spring and King Street for clearance, then they reversed and re-clear it to King and Calhoun. So that's essentially the first day. So in doing the after action review, information was also obtained regarding May 31st. This was not presented previously to the committee. We only presented the May 30th into the early morning hours of May 31st timeframe. So if you look on page I'm sorry, Captain Cretella, can you put that map up for all of the calls, cumulative calls and routes for the first day? Okay, so what was produced and what we did was, this is where the GIS came in and were very helpful. And we wanted to put all the information from that date on one map. So if you take a look at this map, you can see all the activity that was on the peninsula that day, all of the routes together, all of the fire calls and all the police calls in one. So that gives you a really good picture of what occurred that day. Going into the next day on May 31st. So the intelligence at that time indicated that there would be a protest at White Point Garden, but there was no other confirmed information. There was also some information that other protests may occur at Marion Square and also what was named Pineapple Park, possibly referring to Waterfront Park. This map that is being shown by Captain Cretella is really the whole day together. You will see in the lower left-hand corner, the 9 to 1 p.m. period, and then you will see some other positions along the way of different areas that the protesters were on that date. So from 9 to 1 p.m. on May 31st, there were several protesters who were at White Point Garden and the Battery. The crowd grew from about 200 to 300 protesters, and there were 10 opposing protesters observed at the monument and a request for officers at that time. There were Charleston Police Department officers present in the beginning, but a request for more officers was made at that time. The Charleston Police Department QRS and Harbor Patrol were moved into place, as well as the Mount Pleasant CDU, who were present. The crowd grew to over 500, but remained peaceful. The Charleston Police Department did have to close down intersections. They gave dispersal orders to that crowd, and the majority of the crowd dispersed without incident. Around noon, there were a lot of splitting into multiple groups at that time, and multiple small groups were now mobile throughout the peninsula. At that time, the Charleston Police Department put a notice on social media advising citizens of an upcoming curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Now, from 1 to 3 p.m., a dispatch call came in referencing protesters on King Street threatening a business owner and contractors trying to clean up. You will recall that's when there was the big cleanup on King Street that morning. The Charleston Police Department deployed officers. There was also now another group of protesters walking to the East Bay pedestrian on-ramp on the Ravenel Bridge. That group grew to about over 50. The Charleston Police Department CDU units were deployed. Also, Mount Pleasant CDU was present, and Charleston County Sheriff's Office CDU was present as well. There was some blocking of the streets at that point. Vehicles were stopped on the bridge. There were dispersal orders given, and eventually that area was dispersed. There was a dispatch call that came in advising that a concerned citizen relayed that the night may be worse than the previous night. The PSOC advises SLED, DNR, and PPP to have cars mobile and available to assist. From now 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., there are protesters throughout the peninsula that ultimately end up in Marion Square. Initially, there are groups of 40 to 50 protesters in the four corners of Marion Square, and there are 150 protesters at Mother Emanuel Church. There are protesters in the street, and Charleston Police Department engages in traffic management, and there's a request to close off the route from the night before. There are now reports coming in of vehicles being vandalized. There are protesters in the street at King and Calhoun blocking traffic. This Charleston Police Department CD unit is deployed. And at some point, there's an estimate of 1,000 protesters. Some of those protesters eventually do move into Marion Square, and Marion Square CD units from Charleston Police Department, Mountain Pleasant, and Charleston County arrive, and Berkeley County units arrive as well. Several dispersal orders are given in Marion Square, and for those who fail to disperse, who may be engaging in civil disobedience, assaulting officers, interfering with arrests, etc., are arrested at that point. The crowd begins splitting up and additional units are deployed. There are some reports coming in of 2 buses of protesters pulling into downtown. And now we have a crowd of about 100 to 200 protesters dispersing from Marion Square and going towards King Street. Again, there are further orders of dispersal given to disperse these crowds, and more groups noted coming across the peninsula. CPD advises citizens to stay out of the downtown area and to stay out of Marion Square due to the police activity. Now from 5 to 8 p.m., from that time frame, the protests are continuing. There are reports of rocks being thrown at officer. There are additional CDU units being deployed. When a group from Hampton Park, and you'll see that up in the left corner of the map, dons gas masks and marches back to Marion Square. At this point, we do have multiple mobile groups again in the peninsula. Arrests are made and chemical munitions are deployed. At 6 p.m., the curfew is in place. Groups are dispersed and curfew violation arrests are made. the National Guard arrives. At 7 p.m., there are fires reported in the roadway in the area of America Street and Johnson Street. The fire department at that point requests assistance from the Charleston Police Department. CDU from the Charleston Police Department and other jurisdictions arrive to escort the fire department and also to engage in crowd control. Can you still hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, all right. Okay, so that is the end of the timelines for those periods. The next portion of the report is the officer response. So if you look at page 22 of your report, you will see the officer response, and this is essentially a collection of how many officers responded to the events of May 30th and also May 31st from the Charleston Police Department and from many other jurisdictions that came to support the department. So initially, for the plan that was created for Saturday, May 30th, 51 officers were assigned. As the day grew on and the crowds grew larger, CPD deployed an additional 123 officers for a total deployment of 170 officers during the protests and riots on May 30th. The Charleston Police Department also held the day shift over, and midnight shift officers were brought in to work early. On May 31st, a total number of 204 Charleston Police Department officers were deployed throughout the day. The department had enacted 12-hour shifts beginning day shift 7 a.m. on Sunday, May 31st. So you can see by the chart, many other departments also supported from Berkeley County, Charleston County, Goose Creek, Mount Pleasant, North Charleston, Sled, Somerville, Sullivan's, and of course the National Guard, as I mentioned, on May 31st. That is the staffing response. I'm now going to turn to Captain Cretella to talk about the arrest.
Thank you, Ms. Malloy. In talking about the arrest, before we get into the data that we have provided for you, the 2 points of interest that we want to talk about is number one, that there is a difficulty in making an arrest in a riot situation. And that is based on the methodology that all lives are important. When you go to make that arrest, you also have to take into account the innocent bystanders that might be in the crowd. There could be an elderly couple or even some juveniles as well. And also the second point of interest is that the riot typically is not stationary. As the riot's moving, the civil disturbance units and the law enforcement also moving with those rioters and trying to coordinate to actually make the arrest, it proves difficulty at different times. If you flip to page 25 and 26, continuing on from there, it talks about the arrest. And some of the highlights that I think are important is that we looked at the total number of arrests over the 2-day period, which was May 30th and May 31st. On May 30th, we had 5 on-view arrests, and we had 32 arrests based on 104 charges also that came from warrants. Moving on to May 31st, we had 46 arrests based on 52 different charges. In addition to that, these charges range from anywhere from municipal, state to federal charges. And furthermore, they range from arson to burglary to damage to property, disobeying a lawful order, inciting a riot, and even unlawfully carrying a handgun. And now I'm going to turn it over to Captain Bruder, and he's going to talk about the calls for service during this time period.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so what I'm going to put up on the screen here is just a general number here talking about calls for service. So I think it's important to realize here first that Consolidated Dispatch was who receives most of our calls for service in through the either administrative line or through 911.
Jason, you're fading in and out.
had their hands full that night as well. We asked them to pull, the phone actually rang and they had to pick it up from somebody and start taking information. So as you can see by the graph there on the screen, a normal weekend for the previous 2 weekends on a Saturday night into a Sunday night had 800 to just under 1,000 calls. On this particular night on the 30th, they had over or right at 1,600 calls. So that's a lot of calls coming in a very narrow time window. And as we'll talk about in a minute,
Hey, Jason.
a lot of that was focused on the
Captain
riots that the
Bruder.
city of Charleston had itself. So with that, that is a countywide number there, which we have to realize that we're not the only thing happening. We just listed a lot of resources that are coming in from other jurisdictions, which that they too are experiencing different things going on in their areas. So we were very appreciative and fortunate to have them be able to come assist us that night. So the next graph I'm going to put up here is a calls for service. So this is when a police officer is requested to come to a scene, and this is what we do day in, day out, is respond to calls for service. But they can come in a myriad of ways. We just talked about citizens calling to report that. They call on the phone, but that can also be what police officers see. They could be flagged down by someone, or they could be what they see themselves and wanting to maybe stop something from happening or what have you. So there's also, when those calls are coming in, they might be from a victim, or they might just be from somebody that's a witness observing something.
Hey, Captain Bruder. Hey, Jason.
Keeping all that in mind, we had 173 calls between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. on the night of the 30th. 173. We compared that to the previous 2 weekends to give it a little bit
Captain Bruder.
perspective.
You want to do it?
You're breaking up.
Yes.
You're breaking up.
All right.
Jason, you could try turning off your video. That might help.
All right. How about now?
That's better. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Where do you need me to start back from?
Well, just go back to the 1,600 calls that came in from CCDC and then pick up from that point. That's good. Thank you.
All right. The dispatch actually received as far as the number of times they received a call that day. So that's how many times they picked up the phone to actually answer either an emergency line or an admin line there. And to compare that, that's 158 calls. So that's a significant increase there throughout the county that's going on. And to realize
Captain Bruder, you're breaking
it's
up
not
again.
just what's going on in the city of Charleston that day, but that's all right. All right.
Are you trying to correct that problem?
Right. I am. I'm on a hotspot, so that's probably why it's getting a problem. Let me try to plug in somewhere. I think we're going to cover damage report, and then we'll come back to the call.
Well, you were breaking up really bad. We could hardly hear you.
Can you all hear me?
You're on mute, Heather.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead with the damages portion of the report. If you turn to page 29 of the report, you will see that a personnel injury and property damage assessment was done. Now, the scope of this, of gathering this information was really limited to gathering information about the Charleston Police Department property damage and also some notation of personnel injury for city employees, including firefighters. What you won't see in here, which is not part of the assessment for purposes of this report, but no less significant, is an assessment of the property damage within the city itself, meaning those businesses that were burnt down, were vandalized, etc. Those businesses that sustained significant property damage. But that is part of what occurred that night, certainly. Additionally, we put together this report, and another part of it, as far as the information concerned that is not in here, is information about any significant damages sustained by the partnering agencies of the Charleston Police Department in terms of personnel, staffing, and equipment. So for the damages for the Charleston Police Department and for any personnel injuries, there were no reported deaths. There was no reported serious injury. 3 City of Charleston police officers were injured, 4 City of Charleston firefighters were injured, and 3 law enforcement officers from outside agencies were injured. There was property damage that was sustained to vehicles for the Charleston Police Department, and also a body-worn camera. For fires, there were 22 reported fires. And I'd like to mention that in compiling this information, we reached out to the fire department, who was very generous in sharing information about the fires. And you will see in one of the appendices that the fire department put together a map of the area, which shows where all the fires occurred during those 2 days. And additionally, they did a breakdown of the building fires as well. So that information is there as well. So now I'm going to go on to the next subject, which is response to resistance and aggression. There was an overview of any of these responses on May 30th and May 31st. And throughout those 2 days, there are notations after a review of those reports of different types of responses by the Charleston Police Department. The first and most basic response that was seen was the presence of uniformed officers and marked patrol vehicles. There were also communications with people involved in the protest, though sometimes that proved very difficult because many times it was hard to decipher who the leaders of the protests were to try and aid in communication. At times when further response was needed for resolution of some of those situations, mobile field forces of uniformed officers in riot protection gear with helmets were utilized and deployed. And additionally, in some situations, other force options were utilized when there was a issue of safety and force. You can read through the categories. There's 4 of them within the report that were utilized during that time frame. And that will explain to you the different types of force for those 2 days. I'm now going to go to the what has happened since portion of the report. Essentially, this states that in the week following these riots and protests, all the days off for Charleston Police Department were canceled, and officers remained on 12-hour shifts to ensure there was enough staffing to manage the potential additional civil unrest. Numerous events have been held downtown since then. On June 8th, the department did return to normal shifts. And on July 9th, the issuance of parade permits was reinstated. And this This proved to be very helpful in the process because this assisted the Charleston Police Department in reestablishing dialogue with event organizers. Once the department knew who the organizers were, they could establish communication and understand where the protesters were intending on going and actually what they were planning on doing. Since this time, the Charleston Police Department has processed nearly 60 parade permits, which has meant a significant resource commitment from the department to ensure the safety of individuals at these events. Additionally, a mention at the end regarding COVID-19. We know that there was a lot of close contact throughout some of these protests and riots. And thankfully, there have been throughout this time limited effects of COVID-19 for the police department in connection to these days of protests. If you would like, I can go back and talk about the calls. Oh, okay. I'll let Captain Bruder continue with the calls for service.
All right, thanks, Heather. Sorry about that, everyone. Sometimes the best laid plans, right?
That's okay. We can hear you a lot better.
Good deal. All right, so I think for the third time now, 1,600 calls is what the number that the Consolidated Dispatch actually received between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. It is a county-wide number there, but as you'll see in a minute, a lot of these calls were about Charleston and what was happening in our city here. So, but to compare that to the previous weekend, 958 calls. The weekend before that, 882 calls. That 958 was a Memorial Day weekend. So when you think about a holiday weekend in the county, and then to nearly double that the next week is pretty significant event there. So Consolidated Dispatch obviously had their hands full as well with taking in all this information and keeping up with it and getting it to us so we could address it was quite a daunting task that night, and we appreciate everything they did. It also helps relay that the city wasn't the only place having issues. So all these calls weren't us and in the city. So North Charleston, the county itself, Mount Pleasant, other areas were having calls and having to address issues there, which makes the response that we talked about earlier even more important, that those officers and those departments were able to free themselves up to come provide assistance that night. So we got the 1,600 calls that came into Consolidated Dispatch, and that translated into, between the hours of 8 p.m. and 2 a.m., 173 calls for service for the police department. Now that might not sound a lot, but that was a lot. That is just for the peninsula area, and this is almost solely concentrated in the areas of where those riots were. So if you reflect back to the maps we just showed you, it's really all those dots on that map translate to 173 calls. So those calls, they came in through Consolidated Dispatch. Some officers were seeing things and calling them in. People, citizens were calling them in as victims. Citizens were calling them in as witnesses and seeing what was going on. And some were even calling from out of town, just saying, hey, we see what's going on, and you've got something going on King Street. Do you know that? And there are those types of calls that people are calling from all over the place to let us know. Officers are getting flagged down, and that's how we get calls for service every day. But to have 173 in a 6-hour time frame is a lot. We compared it to the previous 2 years, which the last weekend in May is typically Memorial Day weekend, and that's what those weekends were in 2018 and 2019. You can see 56 calls, 53 calls. Of those we looked at it, of those 56 and 63, 2 of them were burglary or vandalism in progress type calls. 2 between 2018 and 2019 combined. For 2020, we had, I believe, over 50 calls just for burglary and vandalism as a part of those 173. So we clearly have an issue going on, and we got multiple calls coming in. And just a little bit of perspective there, I did a little bit deeper dive in this 173, and between 10 and midnight, there was nearly 100 calls for service that came in. And what that means is about every minute we're getting a new call come in, a little bit more than a minute, a new call for services coming in with new information, which is having to be processed so we can make sure that we're using our resources as efficiently as possible. And out of that, what we have to do is we start triaging calls. A lot of people hear about priority codes and those types of things. We follow that. We use that as our policy. It's adopted by Consolidated Dispatch. Our highest priority is a code 1, a priority 1 response. That's an emergency response, a life-threatening situation. And we had several of those that night. We had code 2 responses, which is urgent response required, felonies in progress. And then our code 3 is or priority 3 is a normal general response that we would handle where we don't drive lights and sirens and that type of thing. So we had all these different types of calls coming in that day. And when you start getting multiple emergency response, potentially life-threatening issues coming in at the same time, we start having to not only prioritize, but then triage those calls. Which ones are the most imminent? Which ones are the we need to get there the quickest? And we've followed this through our SWAT training and through our Special Operations Division, and it applies to situations like this as well. But the National Tactical Officers Association has priorities for life, and these are in critical events where the highest priority is placed on the hostage. Next is the innocent civilians in the area or on the scene, then law enforcement, and then the suspect. So then we start having to take all these life-threatening situations and triage those and decide which call is going to get the SWAT operators that are out there in quick response vehicles to be directed to the scene. Which one are we going to send a small team of police officers to that scene to try to address and still maintain all these different issues going on with the riot itself and not let that group continue to spread throughout the peninsula. So obviously with just the sheer volume of calls there, 173 compared to 53, we've got a lot going on. And we're answering those calls, making sure we get to everyone in an appropriate manner and as quickly as we can. Some of those calls we got to the next day as we started looking into the calls of when we got there, nobody may have been there, and they started doing calls and following up with people that had called the previous night to make sure that any reporting of damage or anything like that was addressed in a follow-up manner. But when we had those live priority calls, there were teams that were sent. It might have been a small group of officers, it may have been a SWAT team component, or it may have been a number of officers already in that area that were addressing the calls there. So again, I apologize for getting out of order there. I think we got
That's okay.
back
Technical
on track.
difficulties come up. Thank you, Jason, for that report. All right, Heather, where are we now?
Okay, we're now in the after action portion of the report. And as you will recall, I told you previously that we base this on guidance from the National Police Foundation, as well as guidance from other jurisdictions on how to conduct an after action review. And I'm now going to turn it over to Captain Cretella to take you through that.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Malloy. As she said earlier, that we broke it down into 5 different sections that we felt were appropriate. When we talk about the after action, we look at it as a what happened and turn that into a positive practice and a lesson learned. So we're going to go through these 5 nuggets, if you will. We're going to give you a small snippet of the positive practice and the areas for improvement and or lessons learned from each of these. The first we're going to start off with is command and control. The positive practice that we're going to focus on is that as the event began on May 30th, an incident action plan had been developed and was in place. The plan identified the incident commander, the Public Safety Operations Center staff, and field commanders and officers. The plan was appropriately developed, and CPD had more than sufficient resources available based on the intelligence that was present. From the lesson we learned is that while the original plan was comprehensive, that the unprecedented scale and nature of the civil unrest meant that CPD risked being overwhelmed, and there was no contingency plan in place for such extreme circumstances. Once all of these resources assigned to the event were being utilized, all the commanders in the PSOC took on a variety of unassigned tasks to ensure the function of the department. These tasks included looking for additional resources, planning for relief of the current officers, keeping up with the current status of the event, and providing direction to field commanders. Now we're going to move on to the internal communications. The positive practice that we focused on was the use of the police radio was a primary method of communication between the PSOC and the officers within the field. From the beginning of the event, a designated channel incident 3 was utilized. When multiple agencies from across the region came together, the use of specific codes can become an issue with clear communications. However, for this event, almost everyone used plain talk, which reduced confusion in such a chaotic communication. The lesson learned there is that during the height of the riot on May 30th, the patrol radio channel, which is the main channel for CPD-1 for the peninsula, transitioned from carrying the normal calls across the peninsula, which are for teams 1, teams 2, and team 9, to in-progress calls pertaining to the riot. In effect, the patrol teams were being dispatched to the riot on CPD Channel 1, but the riot was being managed by the PSOC on Incident Channel 3. Focusing on external communications, the positive practice is that the Charleston Police Department did utilize reverse 911 during the event of May 30th to alert individuals on the peninsula of the riot and to shelter in place. In addition to that, the PSOC also notified the Charleston Area Regional Transportation Authority, CARTA, of the riots, and they were able to adjust their routes. In addition to this messaging, we also put out via the department's Twitter and Facebook accounts of what was going on. The lesson learned is that a media team should focus on partnering with local media outlets to provide the public with instructions on how to stay safe, as well as with regular updates of the situation and with ways they can help resolve the situation. We have established a public information team to facilitate engagement with the media outlets and provide updates via social media since May 30th and May 31st. Moving on to keeping track of resources and personnel. The positive practice is that the Charleston Police Department has invested heavily in partnerships throughout the area, and being able to call on these agencies allowed for us to gather enough resources to address the protest and the riot. Although not the most efficient method that the PSOC was using, which was tracking officers via whiteboard, it did allow us to maintain within this manner for quick reference to what resources were available, how teams were organized, and how equipment was deployed. The lesson learned here is that a single point of contact would have been beneficial. And by having a single point of contact, the most needed resources can be requested and arrive with appropriate equipment. The last nugget that we're going to talk about is a response to a civil disturbance unit. We're going to start off with the tiered response plan, which is the basis of our civil disturbance unit. And that in order to adequately achieve the objectives set forth, we utilize this national tiered response. This tiered response allows for police to adjust its presence based on the size of the crowd and appropriately respond to the crowd's actions without increasing the tension of the moment by appearing too aggressive. The positive practice is that by having regular training on the department's response to civil disturbance, officers were prepared to assist as members of the mobile field force. In addition to this, it is important to note that members of the civil disturbance unit train at a minimum quarterly. The lesson learned is that in addition, a small contingent of the civil disturbance unit members were available. However, as these events unfolded, the available resources were overwhelmed. CPD should review and improve its process for immediate recall of additional department resources to respond to a critical event to the extent of its possible nature. Now we're going to turn it over to Chief Reynolds and have him talk about moving forward from the events of May 30th and May 31st.
All right, Chief. Thank you, Captain. We can't hear you, Chief. Chief Reynolds?
You hear me okay?
That's better.
All right. So moving forward, the following are areas where CPD has already made adjustments and areas in addition to what Captain Cattell just talked about, where CPD intends to make improvements as a result of the after action review and discussions. Can you hear me okay now? Still?
Yeah, there was some feedback coming, like an echo.
That's better.
So go ahead.
Okay, so, and this is on page 42 of the report, if you have the report in front of you. Actions taken to date, additional actions already taken. CPD, and I'm just going to highlight each area, has and will continue to place a field commander, a lead field commander, ideally at the rank of captain, that's usually what it is, to coordinate the numerous resources in the field. Number two, by using a consistent program, a software program, CPD is able to better adjust to rapidly expanding events in a manner to ensure improved communication, maintain organizational structure, and better account for the personnel and equipment assigned to these pre-planned events and events that come up like this. Number three, CPD has created a supervisor group for sending text messages to all department supervisors, which allows for the rapid dissemination of information about critical events, adjustments to shifts, and the expedient request of additional resources. Number four, in order to inform department employees of the status of ongoing events, we've started sending out regular updates via email and providing other avenues as much so that we can give as much notice as possible for upcoming and ongoing events. These emails are sent from the PSOC and other locations to ensure situational awareness throughout the department. Number five, we have made for a more efficient approach, and it was created for documenting multiple arrests, and including the Central Detectives Division, who have created new forms and a new process. Number six, because there may be multiple arresting officers from several law enforcement agencies in these types of situations, we now assign a case agent to serve as the primary point of contact and manager of these cases. Number seven, the Community Outreach Division has worked with the Business and Neighborhood Services Division to create an email list for communicating upcoming and ongoing events and for notifications to be made of possible civil unrest and other related updates. CPD has also, number eight, created a public information team to have more employees trained and available to disseminate information.
You lost your chief. You're on mute.
All right, good.
Did you hear, what number did I drop off on?
Number eight.
Did you hear number eight?
Go ahead and just repeat number eight.
Okay. CPD has created a public information team to have more employees trained and available to disseminate information to the public and work with local media outlets. Number nine, we have purchased additional protective equipment to allow for more officers to be equipped to safely respond to a riot-related civil unrest event. Those things already have occurred and those actions have been taken to date. These are additional actions that are in progress and ongoing. Number one, an ongoing and complete review of our policies and field guide regarding response to civil disturbances is underway. One example is an immediate item that is being addressed currently is the organization of civil disturbance unit into smaller teams that supplement the larger mobile field forces. Number two, we are conducting scenario-based training that is incorporating current and local trends in 2020, all the things that we've been experiencing in our city to make sure that all of our command and our entire department is aware of these scenarios and that we have consistency in that process and that application. We've created a system to provide immediate notification to first line supervisors, and additionally are reviewing other practices around the country that will increase our consistent communication with all of our employees during critical events. We're researching new technology, improved equipment, and the use of vehicles based on lessons learned from jurisdictions that have more documented history of civil unrest. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cities that have a lot more experience that we can learn from them, and we are reaching out and getting some of those practices and looking into those areas. Number 5, to address the highly mobile protest groups and extended marching, we're focusing on and are committed to the use of other resources for crowd control, to include increased use of bicycles, as they are utilized by several departments very effectively across the country and found to be useful in managing small and large crowds. And the last thing in this area is our employee wellness. I get questions all the time, how are the troops doing? And I think that's a very important question, and something I'll just touch on several areas that are listed here. We continue to provide peer support and offer other available resources for officers and professional staff to ensure the mental wellness of all of our employees. This has been a very difficult year, and I tell you, this is something that I think is really important to us, and an area that we continue to focus a lot of energy and effort on. A critical incident affects not only an officer or a professional staff member, but it has impact on their family and their friends. And needless to say, this has impacted our entire community. During events, CBD cares for officers by keeping them hydrated, fed, and provided with adequate rest. That sounds easy. It's not always easy, and it's something that we really need to spend a lot of time on. We've worked to ensure that officers and professional staff are provided days off when needed or requested. There are people who volunteered during this event to work, I know, up to 2 weeks without a single day off. And we got a lot of donations and positive reinforcement from community members and businesses, to include food and water and thank you notes. And many of the walls in our buildings are lined with thank you notes from community members, and it really has had an impact on our people to know that they have that kind of support outside the police department and throughout the community. And we've shared many of those notes throughout the department in emails as well. We have embraced this opportunity to improve, to learn, and achieve the best outcomes possible. We have, I would describe, had some very heated, good discussions that have been very productive. And we have, I believe, created a learning environment where we can be better from the lessons learned, so that we can identify these areas and appropriately address them, these lessons learned. Our report has been focused on accuracy, transparency, lessons learned, and making sure that we apply those lessons effectively to make the proper changes, the proper improvements, and get the proper outcomes. And
Thank you, Chief.
I conclude my presentation.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Susan and Heather, Chief Reynolds, Captain Patella, and Captain Bruder. I know there were several other people who were behind the scenes who we had not heard from today, who took part in this presentation, compiling this information, listening to tapes, and reviewing records. It's a very thorough report. I appreciate the maps and the diagrams. That helps us get a clear visual of what took place. It is very thorough. I want to just recognize that Councilmember Waring has joined us. I previously recognized Councilmember Jackson and Appel. Welcome, Councilmember Waring, for joining us on this presentation. At this point, I'm going to call on the members of the committee, and I'll just go down by rank of seniority, starting with by the Vice Chair, Councilmember Seekings, and turn it over to you, Councilmember Seekings, and then I'll circle back to the mayor, and then I have a couple of comments and questions as well. So, Councilmember Seekings, if you've got some questions or input, I'll start off with you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually just relocating here, so hang on one second. Thank you. Oh, where'd I go?
We all seem to be having technical difficulties this afternoon.
Sorry. Yeah, I hit the wrong button. I'm really sorry. We're all kind of being a little bit rookies on this today. So thank you all very much for the report. Just for the record, and just so you all know, we all on this committee, I think everyone saw it for the first time. I got my delivery, thank you very much, at 9 this morning. I didn't get a chance to read it till about noon. So this is all new information. I guess one of the questions I have for Heather and the chief is, this is a preliminary report. You presented a lot of information. Is there still more work that's going to be done on this? And one of the areas that I was wondering about, and I know this is an internal action report, is there going to be any part of this report that will include input or interviews with people who were in and around the events of the 30th and 31st?
Heather, you want to take that one first, or Chief?
Sure, I can take that.
Okay.
Am I echoing?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, let me try this again. Okay, better. Thank you. So the scope of the report did not involve that. I can tell you that when I started the collection of information, it was right after the May 30th and May 31st events. And it took a tremendous amount of time just to really focus within the Charleston Police Department. As I mentioned, when I went over the damages portion, that, you know, we have information about damages in there with regard to the Charleston Police Department and some other minor damages. At the same time, recognizing that there was significant property damage done to the businesses within the peninsula. And it was trying to figure out how to, you know, accurately get all of that information in. So I think it's a question of how much of a scope that we want, you know, to do for this report. I'm open to gathering further information, but we did not include like, you know, talking to citizens and things of that nature. Because additionally, if you look at the 5 factors, the review was actually done for those particular 5 factors. However, it is a preliminary report. And, you know, if there's a request, we can, you know, certainly see how that's possible. But again, the timing and the scope, I just don't know what that would involve.
So just what caught my eye and the first read through was the graphs and the charts that you show at the end, and one of which is all of the different incidents and events that had happened in the corridors over the course of those number of hours, and how many people that would have involved. And it seems to me that a report like this should at least have some inclusion of experiences on the ground by those who are involved involuntarily in this. And when I say involuntarily, people who are victimized by some of what happened along here. But again, there's a graph that shows very, very clearly the number of calls, the number of incidents. I just was a little bit surprised there wasn't an inclusion of some at least conversations with people who were there on the ground.
Thank you, Mr. Seekings, and let me echo that, because that was what caught my eye. You're on mute, Heather.
I just, Council Member Seekins, I couldn't hear the first part of what you were saying.
I'll repeat it
But
for you.
I do understand what you were saying, and I guess we can have further discussions about that.
Well, let me just chime in on that now, so I don't want to lose this moment. That was what caught my attention as well, as what Councilmember Seekins has just highlighted. I think it would behoove the department to interview a handful of folks. This was a Saturday night. This was a weekend of Memorial Day. There were, as you all mentioned, a number of tourists in town. Folks were downtown. It was an active evening. We were all caught off guard by this. So I think it would be helpful. There were folks who were literally trapped into certain businesses and certain establishments, certain restaurants. And there were reactions from a lot of folks, including hotels and restaurants and bars and other places. if you should be, if you need help, we know who those folks are, because we've talked to them. And I think interviewing some of them to getting a citizen's perspective on what they saw, what they feel would give you another report on that. And I think that including a assessment on property damage to these establishments would also give us a full comprehensive overview as to the scope and nature of these events. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be limited to the Saturday night part, but I think that would just help us out tremendously in doing that. Councilman Seeking, I did not mean to cut you off, so I don't know if there's anything else along with what I just said that you want to add to or go into another area.
No, and I think we all need to synthesize this a little bit.
Councilmember, I missed part of what you said, so I hope I'm not interrupting someone. But I do just want to comment on that certainly, I think, let's figure out how we're going to do that. But I certainly think that that's something that we can add. And then as far as the property damage, yes, I did mention that before. And we'll have to figure out how to capture that information to add to the report.
And
Councilman
just so I can
Seeking.
follow up just very quickly, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
again, we all, I think, need some time to synthesize this. And the chart I was referring to is specifically that chart on page 55. And I know that all of the information you gathered is focused on the 5 points of information and reporting that you want to do. But it just seems to me that along that route and in those areas where there was so much going on between calls and groups and all that, that there's got to be some information in there that will be useful to us as a city and you all as a department about what was actually happening on the ground from the eyes of those who were not there as police officers or employees of the city and were not there as rioters, but were there as, for lack of a better word, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but bystanders and people who are ultimately perhaps even victimized. So it seems to me that it may be something that can be included, but I'd like to put a little more thought into that and maybe try to focus a little bit more, because that could lead to a never ending chasing of information. I understand that too. So I'm thinking out loud here as we go through this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Seeking. Councilmember Shealy.
If I could, Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
If I could just briefly add to that as we move on. I think what I'm hearing is that there's a need for a victim impact statement, for lack of a better term. And there are a lot of victims in this case. There, of course, are some pretty significant federal, state, and local criminal investigations that are ongoing and of very significant importance and significance in terms of prosecution. And so it may be that if we encapsulate this in some form, that is where perhaps an outside group, it may be somebody within the city, but not within the police department, that would do some of those interviews and capture that victim impact statement. That's just some initial thoughts that come to mind. I think we could build on this a lot. What I will say is we needed to make these adjustments, as we've said. We started making adjustments the night of the 30th, the night of the 31st, and every day since then. We have not waited, but for the purposes of the report, I do think the victim impact statement to the city should be captured, and I think we can accomplish that, and probably need to put a little bit more thought into how we would create that narrative and put a dollar amount on the losses sustained to the city and somehow have a section that covers that.
So
Thank
Chief,
you.
if I could just follow up really quickly on that, I didn't want to call it a victim impact statement, but a third-party observation, I guess. And I wasn't really looking at it in terms of quantifying the amount of damage, just the observations that were made by people who were there and seeing it in terms of lessons learned, sort of anecdotally and from a third-party eye, is really sort of what I was envisioning through my not so very articulate questioning. Anyway, thanks.
And Chief, let me pick up on that as well. I think just having a citizen's point of view as to what happened and the impact, and you call it a victim impact, but it's more of a citizen, not law enforcement perspective on this. And we don't have to have everybody who was out there interviewed, but I just think to get a flavor for that is important. And I think some kind of understanding as to the number of businesses that were impacted, vandalized, broken into, property stolen. You know, we saw some of these images where people were just walking into an establishment and people were hiding in closets and things of that nature. That's sort of is an integral part of all of this. And I think that would help the community understand the full scope of this, just to have a full perspective on it. I'm going to turn over to Councilmember Shealy now. Councilmember Shealy, any questions, input, comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first of all want to say thank you to Ms. Heather Malloy for all the work you put in. Of course, Captain Cortella and Bruder and Captain Thompson, even though he's not on here, I think put a lot of work in this. And just want to say thank you to all of you for doing this very detailed report. But also just, want to say thank you to everyone who serves in uniform for the city of Charleston. Obviously, these ladies and men put their lives on the line, every day, but they were asked to perform duties that were way out of their routine on May 30th and 31st, and really, I guess, up to June 8th. But anyway, I can't express enough how thankful I am, for your service. And I just want to let you know you're appreciated. So and other departments too, there were a lot of department heads and a lot of people with the city that put in a little bit extra during these times. The livability department, for example, put in a lot. So thank you to everybody with the city for what you've done. And some of that showed up in this report. And obviously we've got a great partner in Charleston County. Looking through this report, it's incredible what Charleston County Dispatch, EMS, Sheriff's Department, everybody with the county. I mean, that was incredibly valuable for what we needed to do. And obviously we also work with the Berkeley County Sheriff's Department. We appreciate you too. Mount Pleasant put in a lot of work. Obviously, the others, North Charleston, Goose Creek, Somerville, I think Myrtle Beach got involved in Sullivan's Island. We just appreciate your partnership in this, and obviously state and national agencies too, SLED and DNR, probation, parole, ATF, FBI. Thank you so much for what you have done to help us. We really appreciate it. But obviously the report shows this was a challenging event. Our police department didn't anticipate and wasn't prepared for the scale of what happened here on May 30th anyway. And, resources and communications were lacking that afternoon and evening, and there was significant damage. Several people, experienced a very terrifying experience that night, as Councilman Seekings was saying. But it's good to see in this report that there's some important changes and that they've become a priority, and that many of them are already put in. Good to see that we're improving internal and external communications, that we're going to have clearer management on the Public Safety Operations Center and the staging manager and staging locations, and all of that organization coming together. And I appreciate the work that's gone into that for the future plans of our police department. We obviously have a little bit of damage control to do now, and we must work real hard to build confidence in our community and build that trust and communication coordination with the restaurants, hotels, other business owners. I think that's very, very critical right now. And I see that it's in this plan, and I'm glad to see that. It's obviously been a very painful experience for all of us. And I can see that we've learned from this. So obviously we all hope that another threat like this doesn't happen, but I think this report, shows where the failures were and shows that there's a better plan for preparing, for communication, for organization and management, going forward from here. So thank you again for all your work on this report, Ms. Malloy and the others. I appreciate it and look forward to seeing the actions coming in place that's going to help us improve. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shealy. I want to then turn on to Councilmember Sacman.
Thank you, Chair. I won't speak long, but I do want to echo Councilmember Shealy's thank you for Chief and for Heather for putting this together. I know it's been a difficult several months for all of us, but I do know that the report for me is striking that, you know, there are some critical things that you all have identified and really had to look in the mirror and figure out and try to improve upon. And that, to me, that speaks volumes about your leadership, Chief, to be able to do that and do it publicly. So I just want to say thank you for that. To Mike's point, or Councilman Seeking's point, I do think that the interviews or the victim reports from business owners is critically important, as well as a full property damage of the businesses. I'd love to be able to see that, because I do think the narrative that we continue to hear, not just locally, but, you know, nationally, is it's unsafe to be in Charleston, and businesses were completely destroyed on that evening. And I was there just like everyone else on this call, the next morning cleaning up, and you know, there was damage on King Street, but downtown was not destroyed. And I think it's important for us to show that, you know, there was some damage and put things in perspective for folks. Obviously there was lessons learned, and I know things from this report will create a situation where we can improve. But I do need some time to digest this, and I'm really encouraged for maybe our next meeting, Chairman Shade, to really have a kind of an open question and dialogue with Chief and others to basically ask some questions. I do need some time to digest this, put my thoughts in order. So hopefully that's something we can do next time.
Sure.
And then lastly, for me, you know, just the one question I have is, you know, not to Monday morning quarterback things, because there were certainly things that we could have done better. You know, but the curfew, you know, if we issued an earlier curfew, and this is again a Monday morning quarterbacking, would that have helped with some of the issues we had with diners and restaurants and restaurant owners being really unprepared for what was happening? Literally, people were rioting on King Street while folks were eating dinner. So it's just a rhetorical question. Just wondering, you know, if that would have helped you all from the police department to manage the situation a bit better. And it's a lesson learned for next time.
I had that same thought in mind. That's one of my questions, Councilmember Sackin. So I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Mayor, did you want to make any comments or questions or?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Heather and everyone involved in preparing the report. Thank you. It's self-evident already the benefits that will derive from having this report. It's really necessary to have this after action review whenever you have such a significant incident. And as it says on the pages here, it's a preliminary report and has been mentioned, which yes, I agree. We all need a little time to digest it. And that was intentional, you know, to have this presented to you as a preliminary report so that we'd be able to, as you say, digest it and come back and make additional questions and recommendations. Regarding the assessment of other damages, I do think from the property side of things that the building inspections department did a very admirable job of inventorying or surveying all the businesses properties that had experienced some damage. So simply you could inject that report into this report and cover the property side. The human side is I think what Councilmember Seekings is referring to mostly. And I think when we have our public comment period at our next meeting, that we'll likely hear some of those stories and be able to add to this report. Maybe a review, a little more detailed review of those 173 calls could produce some of those same kinds of comments. We all acknowledge that this May 30th was a bad night in the city of Charleston. And I also want to echo Councilmember Shealy's heartfelt thanks to our men and women in service on that night, and in general in our police and fire departments, all of our first responders. Y'all were being under attack and you responded bravely. And we certainly have lessons learned and are seeking those improvements and better outcomes as Chief Reynolds mentioned. But I thank you all for your service, no matter what the situation might be. Also echo Councilmember Shealy's thanks for all those partner agencies that were partnering with us that night. And Heather, the thought did occur to me, I don't know if you reached out to each of them, but you know, I don't know that we would want to ask them to donate, dedicate a lot of time, but maybe just a little survey of each of the other departments that were partnering with us to see if they had any, cogent observations or recommendations to us, might be helpful. And the thought did occur to me, my fellow council members, for us to do a resolution to thank all of those agencies. I know a lot of personal thanks have gone out from the chief and me to some of those agencies, but I think an official thanks from council might be an appropriate thing for us to do in the near future. Those are my comments at this time of thanks and I guess a little optimism here, y'all, of going forward. I hear these actions that are already in place, and I've already seen them in place with subsequent events that we've had in the city since May 30th about how our team really had a better communications both internally and externally. I don't know if everybody's on this email chain with those businesses. They added me on it. So even though it might be a smaller group that's of protesters that it has gathered since May 30th, you get these email updates from Captain Thompson, kind of relaying where they are and what's going on and just letting the business owners know what's happening. So those are the real-time improvements that we've already experienced from this after action review. And as Chief mentioned, there's more to come. And even over the next couple of weeks, as we have a follow-up meeting and before we get to a final report, our slate is open if there are additional recommendations that we can improve ourselves. So sorry to be a little long-winded, but thanks to all.
No problem, Mayor. Thank you for those comments. And so I do see Councilmember Jackson and Waring and Appel and with Councilmember Waring. I saw your two fingers up. So I guess you wanted to add something or make a comment.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Chief, and your command team for what all you all have done. And Councilman Shealy again said it best. I won't repeat it, but it certainly bears repeating, thanking all the other agencies and the men and women of our professional police force. One of the things that I think that certainly should be part of this is certainly the fire department. The coordination between the police and the fire that literally kept King Street from ablaze. And we all know how closely built and frankly adjoined those structures are down there. So you get one going and two going simultaneously, and you've got a domino effect going down there. So I would think we had a great fire about 100 years ago that almost burned this city down, and but for the coordination and the professionalism of the police and the fire department, and Chief Curry and his team, hand in glove, I think that needs to be a verbal part of this report. And hopefully when it's finalized, Chief Reynolds, Chief Currier could address that part. When we went through part of the report, just as we had men and women out, police force that were hurt physically. And I thought I saw 4 firemen. I mean, can you imagine fighting a fire and people throwing bricks at you and rocks at you and bottles at you when you're trying to keep the city from burning? So I think our public needs to know that those first responders stepped up in the form of police, United Forces, and certainly fire. The next thing I'd like to touch on is I wanted to thank you all for the professionalism learned within less than a 25, I won't say learned, but put forth in less than a 24-hour period that I still think, not that we want credit for it, but certainly you all should be recognized for what happened 24 hours later. When I look at cities around this country, and we can call out the Minneapolis and the Chicagos and the New Yorks and the Atlantas and Los Angeles and back around again. 24 hours later, that riot didn't happen. I don't know, and let me tell you, some of those cities I called out certainly have larger police force and more equipped and assets in place than certainly we have. But all I can tell you, that coordination and that professionalism came forth when we needed it most. We did not need a second night. We didn't need a third night. We didn't need a 10th night of rioting. I am sure the people in Portland would exchange our results for theirs right now. The people in Seattle would quickly exchange their results for ours. So I think that portion certainly needs to be highlighted, because if it were a situation where the professional knowledge wasn't in place, I would think the malcontents and hoodlums, quite frank, that ran up and down the street breaking out windows would have been back and would have felt emboldened to come back again and again. So I thank you for that show of force, so to speak. Back to Councilman Seekings. I hear Councilman Seekings, and I agree with Councilman Seekings. And the reason I've said that, there are a couple of, Chief, I don't know whether it's a victim impact statement, but there's some sort of constructive information that's still out there among the citizenry, and in particular the business people, from a standpoint of things we didn't hear, things you didn't hear, the firemen didn't hear, that I think would be offered as, if we knew about it, it would help us going forward. And I stopped by a couple of merchants on King Street who did not get broken into and who did not get glasses smashed, that had, I thought, constructive things to offer. And we can talk about that off the screen. But I think a lot of people will have not questions, but I think you could have done this. I think you could have done that. That would come from a layman's standpoint. But if we get one good idea, one good constructive idea out of that, again, we're going to be better the next day going forward. So now I don't know how we go out and do that. I don't know. Obviously, I've never been involved with a riot before firsthand. And frankly, on this one, I wasn't out there with you guys. But we have to get some sort of constructive information from the people who did not get damaged, but still has something to be offered, making us a little bit stronger going forward. So that's how I heard Councilman Seeking's statement to me. Now, I know there are going to be a lot of people out there that may going to say some things we not going to want to hear. But since May 30th, they've had a lot of time to reflect on things. So I kind of think even when we hear from them today, I would hope it would be more factual as opposed to emotional. And I'm sure emotions will play a part, but it'll be a lot more constructive in October than it was in May of May of this year. So I haven't gotten my copy of the report. I'm sure I'll get it shortly, and I'll go over it. But again, I want you to know that we're grateful for what all you all have done for this city, and I am a firm believer that we have to stick together on this. And when I mean stick together, not against outward forces, to let more people know what was actually done for them. This could have spread far beyond downtown Charleston. It did not. I don't know of a business person in West Ashley that experienced some of the hardships of the people on King Street. So there are many things to be thankful for the professionalism that was put forth. And I think that's something that you need ambassadors beyond the police station to share that information with our citizenry. When we go into these neighborhood associations, we have to tell it, council people. And I know we know that. But anyway, thanks for what you've done. I look forward to going through more detail in the report. But on the other side, I look forward to the constructive advice being implemented that's going to make us a better force going forward. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Waring. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Thank you. And one of the things that you mentioned, Councilman Waring, was on my list to comment on as well, which is the fire department's role in all this. There's a chart in there that shows where those fires took place. I know Chief Courier is on the line with us, but I think also some kind of report as to not just the location where those fires took place, but the nature of those fires, how many of them were intentionally set, the level of damage to those facilities. It really is a true testament to both the fire department and the police department of the coordination working together, because those fires did not get out of control. They did not, could have been much more serious damage. And that is just a pure reflection of the communication between the two chiefs and how they work together. And that is just critical to have that done. Councilmember Jackson or Councilmember Appel, any comments, questions?
Thank you, Chairman. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I don't have a lot to say that hasn't already been said. I wanted to sit in and hear the report for myself. I did get the copy about noon today, and I will be reading it more thoroughly. So my takeaway that is different, I mean, I'm thankful and filled with gratitude for all the sacrifice and the effort and the overtime and basically learning on the ground about an incident that, you know, had never been experienced in Charleston, thank God, in generations. So I think that what encourages me right now, Chief, is as you gave your concluding report, what I wrote down that you said at the very end was that this whole thing has created a learning environment. And I feel like that is where we can really be positive, and the opportunities that will never end for us to continue to learn how to be the best caretakers of the city, provide the kind of policing and emergency services, and obviously with the fire department that we can possibly ever want to be, as long as we're willing to look in the mirror and say that we continue to have things to learn. I wouldn't want to be part of a different culture and an atmosphere that isn't open to that kind of learning experience. So I really am very grateful to your leadership, Chief, and I know that you're delivering it down the command. In that spirit, then, I think if we are going to be talking to people that experienced the May 30th violence and vandalism and all of the, the scary things that happened on King Street, I do think it would be wise of us to also maybe talk to some of the people who were arrested on the 31st, whose charges were dropped. I think we would have a lot to learn from those people. I heard from students at the college who were out on Marion Square that day, and they were really I think they were just affronted by the fact that they saw people that they thought were the peaceful protest leaders being let off under arrest, and I don't think that there's a settled sense in that segment of the community about how we got to that place, and I do feel like that would just be an amazing aspect of what we have to learn here, is that we can't paint with the broad brush all the people that come out to express themselves in anger or frustration or intention. I mean, I was part of the protest on the 30th, and to me, it was the right thing for people to do, to put in context why everyone was here, that Black lives do matter, and that we do have that kind of learning curve in our community that we've admitted to, and we are continuing to learn on those bases. So that's just my suggestion, that if we're going to go the extra mile to talk to people that were damaged and violated emotionally, if not physically, on the 30th, that we should also be talking to people who were taken aback by being under arrest or in a crowd that didn't expect to have that experience with our policing tactics. Thank you very much for everything that you've done, and thank you very much, Heather. It's good to get to know you in this exercise.
Thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't need to reiterate again how much I appreciate and respect our brave men and women of our police department, our fire department. It's been an unbelievably difficult year for these guys, and I just can't stress enough how much I support our brave men and women in law enforcement. It is just incredible what y'all have to do in an extremely difficult environment in a difficult world. So my hats off to that. I just want to make a couple comments about the process. This is a 64-page document that is extremely impressive in terms of how it's been constructed. This was not something that was just scratched out in an afternoon. This is something that is the product of a lot of mental horsepower, resources, collaboration, and this is how you do it. This is how you perform an autopsy on an extremely complicated event of great public interest. It's not, you don't get information on Facebook, you don't get information on Twitter, you don't get information in little sound bites on the radio. That's not how you do it. This is how you do it. This is a product of a department that doesn't have anything to hide, that is demanding of the best of itself in full transparency, and will be the first to admit that things could have been done better, and we'll learn from it in the future. That's the way to do it. That's the way to go. And the way as council members and members of the public that we, engage with this process is exactly what we've done here today. We've had an open viewing of the information. And this is how you learn about what happened. You go to the source, you talk to the chief, you hear from the public safety committee, you hear from the other staff, the other officers. It's not hearing from, some guy third hand about this and that. This is the process. This is wonderful. The process is not over. I think that it's an ongoing effort to improve every day, but this is wonderful, and I'm very proud to be a part of this city. And thank you for the time to speak today on a committee that I am not a part of, but I'm very happy to have participated in this presentation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Appel. So a couple observations, ladies and gentlemen, this is in the report and no one mentioned it. I just want to highlight it because I think this is a testament to the Charleston Police Department and to the chief and to his command staff. And it's on page 42 under the summary. And it is a sentence that said, had even one officer lost focus, the outcome could have been catastrophic for individuals involved in the city of Charleston. I said that earlier, immediately after the events took place on the 30th, 31st. Those officers, those men and women out there were under intense stress, intense violence. They were being assaulted. They had a job to protect themselves, but also to the job to protect the public. They stayed in line. They followed their instructors, their commanders. And as a result of that, I think and I believe that the outcome of the events were so much smoother and so much less catastrophic because those officers were properly trained and they listened to their officers and their command staff. So I think, Chief, that is something that you have pounded all through your career here, and that is training. And I think that just sort of reflects the benefits of that. I dissected this thing. I've read it as soon as I got my hands on it this morning at 9:30. I've made notes. I've got several pages of notes I have on here. I'm not going to go through all of that with y'all. My couple observations are as follows. And I think that what this report has indicated to all of us is that we're not hiding behind anything, that we're embracing the opportunity to make our city safer and to make our police department better. And that's a tribute to the command staff from chief and all the way down as well. There are 2 C's, I think, in here, and that was, and you highlighted this, I think, very well. Communication both internal and external. I think y'all are addressing that, how to better communicate with one another, and how to communicate externally with the public. And that goes back to something I think Councilmember Sackler said about curfews as well. So the 2 C's are highlighted, that being one of the C's. The other was coordination. And then that was the other thing I picked up, more coordination within yourselves. You talked about a contingency plan, the need to pivot. You recognize that. I think that is as well as critical to highlight that, because those 2 things, the communication and coordination, the lack of those things could have been disastrous. But I think that y'all adapted rather quickly to this situation, but you have recognized, y'all recognize, and not us, on your own internal review of things that need to be improved with those 2 areas. And it looks like you've already implemented a ton of those things. The other 2 observations are, and we talked about them, and I wish we would spent more time on it, because the folks were very critical of the response to service calls. And we talked about that in the response to making more arrests. I understand it, and I think that is something maybe we want to elaborate a little bit more on. You talked about the triage with that, the 4 levels, code 1, 2, 3, and 4. You are in a riot. In a riot, when those calls for services are coming in, you just can't deplete, and y'all correct me on this part of it, you just can't leave that line and immediately go respond to that call. I mean, there was a lot of coordination involved with that, doing that, and I think you talked about it. You may want to elaborate on that just a little bit more as to how in normal circumstances what you do on a response to a call for service. But in a riot, it's highlighted, it is exasperated because you've got so many other things you are worried about. You are out there protecting the public, you're out there protecting yourselves. And when a call for service comes in, you've got to respond to it, but it's a different ballgame altogether. And the same thing with the arrest. And there was, I think, a report about one officer tried to make an arrest and he got assaulted in the process of doing that. And you highlighted that in the report as well. You talked about having the team of detectives sort of take over at a certain point. But you just can't go out and make a simple arrest in the middle of a riot. It takes a team effort to do that, because you got to protect not only the person you're arresting, but you got to protect the officers who are in the process of doing that. So I think maybe a little bit more elaboration on that would be a benefit to the community to talk about those two areas. This is one of the most thorough reports I've read, and I can tell you, being an assistant United States attorney for 10 years, I've read some pretty thorough reports, and this is up there. It's well done. I'm very pleased and I'm very grateful that y'all dove into this thing. Y'all were not bashful about highlighting what you needed to highlight, and you're not bashful about taking into account some of the things that you needed to correct and implemented those immediately. So my echoing appreciation to all of you for the work that you did and make this community better. We're not taking any action today. We'll come back on another meeting. I will share, Heather, with you some of my other comments I had on here. Some of them are just mundane sort of things that I maybe to sort of tweak a little bit on some questions I had. But I highlighted, I think, those 2 things I wanted y'all to maybe look at some more, if it need be. And y'all may think that talking more about arrests and response to calls don't need to be elaborated on, but I think that there's some other areas that we just want to talk about. Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
If I may add just a couple more observations, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
No time is moving on. I heard Councilmember Waring's comments about May 30th and May 31st and what a difference a day made. And I look at page 23 that shows the staffing, total staffing, and by the end of the day on the 30th was 336 officers and 381 of the next day. So I guess my observation is in the extreme conditions of a riot or a potential riot. I mean, by by Sunday, May 31st, I mean, with what had happened the night before, there certainly was anticipation and even some intelligence that it was just going to occur again, right? So under those extreme conditions, I believe maybe rather than saying we were caught off guard, we were attacked and overwhelmed. In fact, the report, I know, Heather, at the beginning, you note that we had, in fact, put an incident command plan in place, even though all we had from intelligence was a simple Facebook post that there was going to be, a commemoration, really, of what happened sadly to George Floyd and his murder. So we had 51 officers assigned and an incident command system in place. And that, by the end of the night, was only 15% of the resources that we were able to garner by the end of the night, which is what we needed to manage that extreme circumstance of a riot. So the resources is a really important piece of this. Now, granted, all these other tight logistics of communications and command and control, we realize all need improvement. And so again, I commend you for working on those things. I want to add one more observation, and I guess drawing from one of Councilmember Jackson's remarks, that we as Americans are so blessed, and we value our right to assembly and our right to speak freely on our mind. And every step of the way, including the beginnings of May 30th, when we saw that Facebook post, was to help facilitate our citizens' constitutional rights to get together and be able to say, gee, we don't agree with what's happened in our country or whatever. And we've done that ever since May 31st and putting our permitting back in place. But what we've discovered, I think, is that when you give an inch, you have to be careful that a mile is not taken. And so just a couple of recent examples where we had gatherings, and we made very clear to those who were protesting, gee, you step across this line and we're giving you a legitimate lawful order. And if you disobey that, where does it stop? And that's what happened on Sunday, the 31st, Councilmember Jackson, with some of those college students who might have seen what was going on and might have felt like their rights were being trampled on. But in fact, we realized we needed to draw the line that you disobey a lawful order of a police officer, and there's a consequence to that. And if we, under these circumstances of a potential riot, don't take those measures and allow folks to step over a lawful order from the police, we end up with a situation on our hands. So I don't know if that is helpful comments or not, but again, thanks to everybody. This is very helpful. It's very necessary. It's a very important step in our continuous improvement. And I thank everybody involved. We're going to make it better.
Thank you, Mayor.
Chairman Shade.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to interrupt, but Jennifer did want me to give a wrap-up warning. Community development will be starting at 4:30, and we don't want this group to get kicked off.
Right. So I'm about to close it right now.
Okay.
So thank you for that. Chief, you've been sitting back listening to a lot of this stuff, and I don't want to preclude you. And I'm not going to give you too much time to talk, because I've got to wrap this up as the warning. So is there any quick comment that you want to say before we adjourn?
Yeah, I'm just going to say thank you. We'll incorporate any and all of the things that are being asked for. And I think what needed to be said to this point has been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, so committee members, council members, those who are listening on to this this meeting, again, many thanks to Susan and Heather, to the chief, to the two captains, to all the men and women who are behind the scenes who worked diligently in putting this preliminary report together. Committee members, we will regroup and find a date that we're all available. That seems to be much more difficult than anticipated. But thank you for your patience on that. Bethany will be harassing you a little bit later on this week to find a time that we can meet. At that point, I will call on all of y'all again to ask questions, offer input at that time. And then we'll give the public an opportunity to offer questions or input as well. Then we'll take all of this, see where that leads us, make some more changes maybe to this report and have maybe either a second preliminary or a final report. We'll talk that out a little bit more. But then we can get it to council for council's review and make recommendations to council about adopting a final report. It's been a long 2 days. We had a long meeting yesterday and a long one today. I appreciate everybody's patience and their commitment to the community. I don't think there's anything else we need to do at this point. So we will get off and let the next committee jump in on this. Thank you all very much. Have a safe weekend, everybody. Take care. You're adjourned.
Councilmember
Yes, ma'am.
Shade, I will call you as soon as I get back.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.